Okay, that seems to work. So in this video, we're going to make this, which is this weird shifty-eyed boy. And specifically, the goal that we want to do is to load a GLB scene in Three.js and then animate parts of it, in this case the eyes, to make them look a little bit fishy. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is get this model. I got this from TurboSquid. It's a free model called Cartoon Boy. I'll put the link in the description. Once you get the free download, you have to register for an account here. You can see this, and I'm using Blender, so I can use this cartoonboy.blend file and download that Blender file. I'll open Blender, go to File, Open, go to my downloads, and then select the Cartoon Boy. If I look here, I can see that this is indeed the terrified boy, or how it looks, which is perfect. All right, so there's a bunch of things that we want to do, because we want to shift the eyes, we want to rotate the eyes. But the whole mesh now, the way that it's set up, is that all the origin points are set in the middle, which sort of makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense for the eyes, because if we rotate them here, you'll see that the eye actually rotate around that origin point. You can tell even closer by the Y value, for example. It just sort of rotates around that origin here, which is not really what we want. So I'm going to frame here. Whoa, that's a bit too much. Frame it into the eye. This is the left eye, so I'm going to rename that here. I can press this, double click, and then type eye left. Really note the naming here, because we're going to need that name later on if we import it in Three.js. And then the other one, this one is eye right. And again, we want to set the rotation correctly. And the way that we do that is we're going to select this eye, go to Object, Set Origin, and then say Origin to Geometry. And that's going to place this origin point right in the middle. So now if we change the rotation actually moves that way, which is perfect. Same for the right eye. We're going to set Object, Set Origin to Geometry. Check that this actually rotates, and that's fine. We're going to select everything here and move it up. So G, Z to move on the Z axis, and then sort of put him at the origin point. It doesn't have to be precise, but you can be precise as precise as you want. We're going to delete the lights. We're going to delete the camera. We don't need those in our scene, and then we're going to do File, Export, GLB, GLTF, and now we want to save our file here. So I'm just going to put it on our desktop here. It's going to be called Cartoon Boy, and then in a minute we'll make a folder and then we'll put that in. So this is our GLB file already done. All right, next step is to make a project with Vite and to put our Three.js file here. So I'm going to do that through the terminal. I already have npm installed, so I can do npm. That works. If you don't have that, go watch my previous video on that. So I'm going to go to the desktop, cd desktop, and then do npm init Vite, or sorry, npm create Vite at latest, and I'm going to call this Three.js GLB scene. I use vanilla, JavaScript. All right, and now I can open that scene. So going back to my desktop here, this is the one that I want. I'm already going to copy or move my Cartoon Boy here in the public folder, because that's where I want the asset to be. And then I can go here, open that in Visual Studio Code, and then yes, I trust the authors. I have a previous version of this because I already tried it, but I'm going to work from scratch and just show you this one. All right, so terminal, new terminal. Here we type npm install tree, because we want Three.js as a dependency, and then npm install in general. Do we need to do that? And then npm run dev to run our development server. And then we can command click here, and then we get our basic Vite file. I'm immediately going to open our inspector tools, because I am assuming that we're going to write all these errors here. All right, so with that done, we're going to go to the index file, remove this app, Vite GLB scene, or Three.js GLB scene. We're going to look at our main.js, remove everything except for the style that can stay there. In our index, we removed our thing, and then we are going to set up our basic scene And we can do that through the Three.js basic tutorial, which I always follow because I keep forgetting. So we're going to set our basic scene here. We're going to make a box. We are going to remove that box later because we don't need it, but that's our main here. And then we're going to animate our scene, and then we can animate a cube, which we don't need. So looking at this, if we refresh, all right, we get this error saying tree is not defined, and that's right because we have to import it. So we do import star s3 from tree like this. It's going to import Three.js. What I also want is orbit control, so I can move the scene around. So orbit controls from tree, and then there's examples, JSM controls, orbit controls, like this. And then I also have to set them up. So after I've created the camera, where is it? I'm going to say const controls equals new orbit controls, and that's going to take the camera and this renderer, and then here I can say controls.update, right? And that should allow me to move my cube around. All right, but we don't want a cube, we want something else. So we want to first import our GLTF loader. I'm using Copilot to write a bit of the code here, but you can do that yourself. I probably should turn it off. So we don't want a cube, so we're going to remove all of this bit. We do want a grid helper because that allows us to show where everything is, because otherwise everything's just black. And we add that to the scene, and then we are going to use the GLTF loader. So we say loader.load. The scene is called, remember this was in public, the file is called cartoonboy.glb. Really note the spelling in the uppercase and lowercase letters. And that's going to give back a function with the GLTF here. And then what we want to do is add that GLTF. So that contains a scene. We want to add that to the scene. All right, so normally we should now be able to see our boy here. And as you can see, he's here because he's visible. Well, he's not really visible, but that's the reason why I did the grid helper, so you can see that it's working. The reason why it's black is because we don't have any light in our scene, so we're going to change that. We're going to do an ambient light first, say new 3 ambient light, and then add that to the scene. That's going to already give us a little bit of lighting. And then the other one that I wanted to do was a spotlight. So spotlight, also give it a color. The position of the spotlight, I want it to be at the level of the eyes. So I know that the eyes are at a height of 3. So for the Y value, so I'm going to use 0, then 3, and then for the X value, I'm also going to move back. Note that my camera is at 5. Maybe my light can be at 5 as well. At the spotlight, that sort of works, but if we look at our spotlight helper, so we can insert this spotlight helper into our scene, and we can see where the light is actually pointing, which is like this. The spotlight has a target that we are going to add, so we can say spotlight.target, and then we can also say spotlight.target.position. So where is the light actually pointing to? And that should be, I think, 3, meaning that the light moves up a little bit. So the light sort of shines in the eyes here, which is what I wanted. It still looks terrified, but it's actually a bit better now. All right, so we can remove the spotlight helper. We'll put it in comments here because we don't want that. And then also we want to move our camera a little bit. So the position Z, we can maybe move a bit closer. We can also put the Y position at 3. But note that it's pointing down. It's actually pointing towards 0, 0, 0. And this is because we are using orbit controls. So here for the controls, we actually have to say controls dot, I think, target dot position dot set. No, not really sure. Just target set, I think. Yeah, perfect. So now we're actually looking at the boy. All right, so we've loaded our scene. We've shown our boy. I wanted to say creature here because he looks a bit uncanny. But we want to move certain parts of this body, in this case the eyes. And the way that we do that is by, when we load the scene, is to grab out parts of the scene that we've named. So our scene here, so our gltf.scene, what we can do is we have this function here, I got it in the documentation, called getObjectByName. We can actually do that wherever we are in Three.js. So we're going to use that one, getObjectByName. And then remember the names that we gave in Blender here is eye left and eye right. So these are the names that we want to use. Now, what do we do with this object? Well, we want to move it or animate it in our animation loop. So what we're going to do here is at the top here say, well, we have these variables ready for us, eye left and eye right. And we're going to assign these. Now, note that we assign these outside of this function, otherwise they will only be available inside of this function. But we want them to be available outside of the function, specifically in the animation function as well. So we have to do them here. That means, note also that this doesn't immediately go through because it takes some time to load. So here for the eye left and eye right, initially they're going to be undefined, so they don't have any information here. But the moment we load our scene and we find our eyes, they will be available. So in our animate, we can actually move these around. So I'm gonna leave that here and then say, if we have an eye left and we have an eye right, then what we want to do is set the rotation here. And this is actually super convenient the way that it's set up. I want it this way, but I'm going to write it myself as well. So the rotation here in Blender, what we did is we rotated, if we look here again, we rotated around the Z axis. But note that in Three.js, the Y and the Z are actually flipped. So in this case, if we want to rotate it over this top-down axis, this in Three.js, this is the Y axis. So we say eye left rotation Y equals, and then we can set it to whatever. In this case, what we want to do is, use a sinus function to sort of make it shift back and forth. And let's do it for one eye first, see if that works. Yay, cool. So that moves one eye. It's already pretty creepy. And then we can actually do that for the eye right as well, but maybe the opposite way, so minus sign. All right, cool. And now you can see that it's moving like this. All right, perfect. That's what I wanted to show. Thanks.